We are joined now by Tim Watts of Bama Online. And I told Tim before we started recording, it was a coin flip, him or Bobby Burton. But I was going to only ask Bobby Burton, how's it feel to have an awesome team right now? Tim, there's a lot more questions to ask about Alabama. And the first was probably, one of the first questions that Nick Saban got last night, which was, are you sure Jalen Milroe's your guy?
I like it noted for the record that at any other moment in my life, how you let off a coin flip between you and Bobby would offend me so much I'd hang up and be driving on my way to your house. So for the record, no, I'm just kidding. I get it. Yeah. I mean, you look at the checklist of things Bama couldn't do and win. And if you look at the checklist of what Texas needed to not do to win, they both checked it off. I mean, Bama with the turnovers, Bama with the penalties. It's not as simple as that, though. Obviously, There's more to it. But, two bad turnovers, penalties that took 2 touchdowns off the board, even though they got field goals. So a test of where you're at, I mean, is what we saw. And I think we know where Alabama's at. And I think we have a better understanding. I think Texas is a good football team. I thought they were a good football team coming in. And certainly, left thinking that's a pretty good football team.
Were you surprised that Alabama's offensive line struggled as much with Texas's front?
Yeah, I thought they had a good defensive front. I think Bo Davis is a good coach. I think they've got good talent over there. I wasn't super surprised Alabama didn't get a great push the week before either. I thought maybe they went a little vanilla and we're going to see a little bit more, you had Proctor over there struggling as a true freshman against a pretty smart defensive attack. You didn't see a lot of help over there, guys chipping and, trying to help him out. He was kind of on an island. So I wasn't completely caught off guard. I didn't expect him to dominate the Texas defensive line. I expected him to be more competitive, though.
Yeah, although part of it, I will say, and I was watching the offensive linemen and their body language on some plays. Some of it is the way Milroe plays as well,
absolutely.
Because it does feel like he's walking into some things that maybe a more pure pocket passer doesn't.
Yeah, and sometimes those holds are simply you're pushing a guy left, and then all of a sudden he's cutting back, and you're having to reach out and grab him. A lot of that's dictated. You see that at any level on the reaction of the quarterback. So I totally agree with that. I think it was a little bit of everything there. I think they made it almost one-dimensional at some point. I mean, Alabama did a fine job throwing the ball deep, but they didn't really decide to do that until mid-second, maybe late second. They had some success there, but anything in the middle was a battle. I thought Alabama's wide receivers did a good job, and that was one of the questions we had. Was Alabama's wide receivers going to have a lot of drops, which they didn't. They made some great plays, a couple of times ended up on their head, and so they stood up there, and also felt the Alabama defense was a better tackling team. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had some former Bama staffers in the NFL texting me that same thing. They felt they were more fundamentally sound, but I mean, that's a lot, without any quarterback pressure, that's a lot of time to try to guard a couple of really fast wide receiver, and they got that freaky tight end to boot.
Yeah, J.C. Sanders had a great game, and that's the thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I found it fascinating, and we put a graphic out last week at On3 that I thought was really interesting, and it was Texas versus Bama rosters as recruits, and Bama had twice as many 5-stars, 16-8. They had 50 top 100 prospects to Texas's 18. Their blue chip ratio was 89 to Texas's 61. Their number one position players, this is where it was close, where the person was the number one position player in their class, was 6-5. But it looked to me like Texas had the better counterpart at most positions. Like if we're talking about JT Sanders, certainly the best tight end. Worthy or AD Mitchell was the best receiver on the field. Ewers was the better quarterback on the field. Kelvin Banks was the better left tackle on the field. Tamondre Sweat was the better defensive tackle on the field. Like that was the part that was shocking to me, because, Alabama has always taken this raw material and developed it really well too. We haven't seen that as much with Texas, but I mean, Texas's players looked as good or better in terms of, like, if you were an NFL scout trying to figure out who you want to pick, as Alabama's.
Yeah, I think offensively, Sark went heavy there. They've been active in the NIL. That's why that offensive line is so good. There's been a lot of discussion about that. Very good offensive line. Great. He's obviously a good offensive mind. in his own. So you put an offensive line there. I think Quinn Ewers was the #1 quarterback in his class. Xavier Worthy, I don't know if he's a 5-star, but I remember knowing how talented he was following his recruitment. And he reminded me a lot of Devonta Smith, Smitty at Alabama.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of Alabama recruited him too. Remember, he was committed to Michigan, got out of that, ended up at Texas. Alabama recruited both times. Obviously, the other wide receiver would have been better at Georgia. Not really a wide receiver passing attack the last couple of years. Talent for sure was on offense they had. Sound like Yoda there, don't I? They definitely had offense on the Texas side. They definitely had offense on the Texas side of the ball. I never had any doubts about that coming in. And you knew Quinn Ewers is a good quarterback. You don't get any pressure on a good quarterback. You're going to obviously have a chance to make him great. And I think that's what they did last night. You just didn't see Alabama win any one-on-one battles on the defensive line. And you didn't see a lot of scheming to try to get guys near him. And part of that was, again, the skill set. You got running backs that can catch the ball. They're fast. Wide receivers that can beat you deep. You got tight ends. So it's hard to bring a, cheated defender in there and not have to worry about getting beat.
So this makes me wonder, because LSU has a pretty talented roster. Texas A&M has a pretty talented roster. Looking down the schedule, Tennessee has a very talented roster. Is it possible that Alabama's going to have other games where they won't be the more talented team?
On paper, I mean, that's one thing. I still think Alabama's got a lot of talent on the field. Not being the best wide receiver in that of that duo last night, you got a guy that's probably a first-round pick and probably a second-day pick at worst for Texas. You got a tight end that's going to get first-round consideration. You got a quarterback that's going to go in the first 3 rounds. I think it's still to be determined exactly where he goes. There's a lot of talent out there. I mean, Knobloch was no joke either. He had some plays for Alabama, did some nice things, and Alabama's wide receivers made some big plays themselves. So not being as good as Texas on that short end for Alabama doesn't mean they lack talent. They've still got a lot of talent. They just got to get it out there, figure out. To me, the first question is, what is Milroe? We know what we think he is. How are you going to use him? You can't really put in a A.J. McCarron game plan for him or a Bryce Young game plan. You almost got to use him more like a Blake Sims. He's going to throw the ball deep, let him power run. I mean, again, he's built like Herschel Walker. It's a big, muscular, weightlifting guy back there. If you're going to run him, have a meaning to him. And one of the things I thought Texas did the best job of that nobody's mentioned really is they had a spy on him, a big athletic kid that can run with him. Kind of contained him. He got loose a few times, did some nice things with his legs. But for the most part, with all that pressure coming up front, I would have expected bigger runs.
Yeah, that's what I figured. He'd just kind of get out the back door. But they did a good job spying him. And they just had some good athletes running after him too. Like Anthony Hill, we all knew he was a good player. He was another one of those #1 in his class kind of people. But I thought they did a good job using him. It kind of felt similar to what LSU did with Harold Perkins last year, where you put him in a fairly simple situation schematically and say, go get this guy. And he did a good job of that.
Yeah, as far as Alabama's concerned, they definitely have games to circle. Texas A&M, I know they got throttled, took a pretty big loss to Miami. There's still going to be a handful. College Station. That game's been very competitive every year, whether, matter, what the other team was ranked. LSU's obviously a big game. Auburn, I know Auburn isn't, the team we're used to, but you've seen that several times. Going to Auburn is not easy for Alabama or anybody. We've seen a less talented Auburn team be very competitive. I wouldn't expect anything less this year, but Alabama should have the most talent as they go through the rest of the schedule. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head where they don't match up well.
Yeah, there's nobody obvious, but it's weird because I trying to remember the last time, even the game they lost 44-18 to Clemson in the national title game, it didn't feel like Clemson had a vastly superior roster to them.
Oh, they had Alabama's offense that year was two, that's 15 NFL starters right there. They definitely Alabama had the roster. They just, had their number, out schemed them in that game. But yeah, when I look at Alabama's schedule, of course, I didn't think coming into this, Alabama was like a heavy national champion. I know that caught buzz for 3 weeks. I haven't seen a great team overall. Michigan's been really good. Georgia's been really good. Haven't had super competition, but I've seen teams struggle. You've already got Texas A&M, LSU with losses. Obviously, I think Texas is going to end up being one of the best teams Alabama plays this year.
So Tim, you cover the recruiting piece of this, and I'm curious at what point did Alabama just did they stop getting everybody they wanted, and it started
Well,
getting more competitive for them?
well, they had maybe the number one class ever on paper last year. I know it seems
Yeah,
like it's a lot further off, but I mean, you look at everybody they got. They got impact guys at every position um, on the football field, and especially, probably the weakest would be your favorite was the quarterback position. We know how you love Dylan, and
yeah.
still hearing great things about Dylan. So if your weak area in recruiting class is signing 2 top 100 quarterbacks, it's probably been a good class. This year, I think they've ran into having to recruit against that class. I mean, it's
Ooh.
not just them that happens to. I mean, when you have guys that heavy in a class, I think it affects the next class that you're running up on. Georgia's faced that a little bit too, and it's hard to go back to back to back with number one classes anymore. Factor in the NIL, we see kids going all over. It's just a different ball game. But Alabama, with that said, Alabama has a top 5 class. I think they have the number one 2025 class, so they're still getting plenty enough talent to be competitive year in and year out.
That's what I'm wondering about is just it feels like they don't have the prohibitive talent advantage that they used to have, where their backups could beat most teams' starters. It feels like, and you see this, because I put Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State in the same
Sure.
bucket, and you're seeing guys who would have gone to those places that are now going to Tennessee or to Missouri,
Yeah.
and that's where I'm wondering where that starts to show with some of these superpower teams. Like Texas is a little bit different because Texas has always recruited highly ranked recruits. They're just,
Sure.
I think they're developing them better now. But I do wonder if that does catch up to the superpowers at some point.
Well, I think, Missouri got, one of maybe the best defensive tackle in the country, but I mean, he's going to be an impact guy from statistics, but I mean, how many extra games will one player win? You obviously
Right.
got to string classes together, which is what Georgia's going to do. I mean, you have 5 top 3 classes that say Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. Missouri can handpick one guy in each class, and that's just a hard obstacle to overcome. But I mean, those big names that you see, Auburn's got a bunch of guys. Auburn's got several guys that Georgia recruited, Alabama recruited, Tennessee recruited. They did a good job, getting guys down there that you wouldn't normally expect, especially coming off the Harsin era. So you've got to factor all that in now. I mean, you got the NIL, you got the portal, you got instant playing time, you've got everything going on. But I don't think that's an excuse for the top tier programs. I mean, Alabama is going to have talent to compete. Georgia, Ohio State, USC's up there, and there's other schools I'm probably forgetting to mention. They're always going to have that top 10 talent.
I just think it makes things more interesting. But one of the
Absolutely.
things that we thought made the preseason more interesting, and we were joking about this before we started, is the Nick Saban relaxed. I mean, he's smiling more. He apologized to a reporter for the way he answered a question. I mean, you're just not used to seeing that from Nick Saban. And I joked, oh, they're gonna destroy everybody. But I was joking. Like I didn't actually think because Nick
Right.
Saban was smiling that made them appreciably better. But where do you think that came? Like the college game day guys all picking Alabama as their SEC champion, and you've said it multiple times. You didn't necessarily see that when you looked at the roster. Where do you think that came from?
I didn't see, to me, I think it was a lot was to be determined. I felt Bama is a good team. I still think they're a good football team and have a lot of potential, including winning the SEC or going to the SEC championship and making the college football playoffs. Obviously, you got things to clean up, but I still feel that way. But to me, it was odd that it was like a lot of people were down on Alabama. You saw a lot of people picking 3 or 4 losses, and then all of a sudden you had a bunch of people picking them as national champions and beating Georgia and SEC champions. I was just curious, what are they basing that on when they didn't even know who the quarterback was when they were making those predictions? I just thought, don't you want to see who's taking, snaps and, figure that whole thing out, before you make that prediction though. But I know the media can have that snowball effect. You get somebody to throw it out there. Sounds like a good idea. And we all begin to spitball it and add on it and, get that thing rolling down the hill. But, again, there's a lot of football to be played. We look back 6 weeks from now, maybe Texas is number 1 team in the country. And that loss, you're like, shoot, Bama did a pretty good job to hang with them. Or Texas has 2 of those losses that they seem to have. in their past, and you're like, boy, Bama, really, it really is a bad loss. So college football to me this year was that way last year. So much left to be determined.
Yeah, and I'm happy about that. I like that because
Yeah,
I
same.
I've watched Georgia a few times, and granted they're not playing anybody yet, but they don't look perfect right now. So it does feel like everybody has a chance, and I think that's a little bit different. But you're right. We may look back on all of it. Like I may look back at some of these questions I've been asking you 10 weeks from now and be like, well, that was stupid because Alabama's just fine. So,
Yeah.
but
No,
but
no, no. I think it's legitimate to question it. I mean, we're in week 2. We've got a Clemson, Alabama, and LSU with a loss. I mean, there's 3 top 10 teams basically that have a loss already. I mean, of course, they could finish 14-1 and national champion. I don't
yep,
think Clemson could, but the other guys, all have stuff to clean up right now. Um, but yeah, I mean, some of these teams that we think are great maybe have a couple losses. I still don't know what to make of Michigan. They've looked really good to me, but Ohio State's looked bad. But you know how that goes.
yeah. And
What's
but Ohio
everybody
State's
showing this early?
got a lot of good players. It's just like Alabama. Like if they turn on the Jets and all of a sudden everybody clicks, there's nobody in the country that can beat them. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's
I mean, a lot of things left to play. Georgia looks good. Doesn't have a tough schedule. Have to get into the SEC and see who are they. They could be playing a really good SEC team in the West, or they could be, playing the easier opponent, then go to the playoffs. But they're going to be good. Kirby Smart's a terrific coach and plenty of defensive talent, very aggressive. So I love it. I mean, as an Alabama guy, I'm not happy Alabama has a loss, but I do love that college football. Like I looked at the slate of games this weekend. I'm very disappointed. Might cut
yeah,
my grass for the first time in 22 since I had a child, on a Saturday. You know what I mean? Like, gosh, it's bad. So I'm glad there's good games and we get to watch them and, everything that goes on. But I think Alabama at the end of the day will be fine. Maybe not by Alabama standards. That's such a high bar to set. And, the fans still want the 2011 defense and, those guys that were just monsters that, there's a reason we thought so much of those teams. We never really had seen them, except for the U. Miami has some teams, USC has some teams defensively, and it's just hard to put those groups together.
yeah. And like the 2017 recruiting class, we may
Yeah.
never
Oh,
see anything like that again. It's
yeah.
just, it's that good. So, well, Tim, I appreciate it. Little dose of common sense and reality for the folks.
Hey,
How's your message board holding up? They okay? Everybody
I
okay?
mean, it's kind of like they knew they were wondering about the quarterback position the whole year. And, you kind of, you saw a mixture of Milrow and penalties and no defensive pressure, untimely turnovers. And, it's kind of their worst nightmare. I mean, you flip the penalties and the 2 turnovers and Bama probably wins that game. But that's a lot of games when you got 2 teams, the guys, and the penalty turnovers were really bad. I mean, those were bad picks, obviously. And,
Yep.
the defense did good just to keep one to a field goal. But I think the message board's all right. I mean, Bama fans aren't used to losing, but they'll bounce back.
Well, Paul Feinbaum will get a few phone calls tomorrow. That's all that really matters. Tim,
Hey, that's
thank
all
you
we
so
care about.
thank you so much, Tim.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On 3 Sports YouTube channel.